Welcome to Prop Talk, your one-stop destination for all things multifamily. Whether you're an investor, a seasoned operator, a first-time manager, or just curious about the industry, we're here to break down complex property trends and dissect the latest market news while providing valuable insights for you. At Prop Talk, we delve into the nuts and bolts of property management. We also explore innovative strategies for navigating different market conditions and discuss how technology is shaping the future of multifamily. But that's not all. We also aim to reveal the human side of the industry with candid stories, fun facts, and the untold tales that define the world of property. Today's episode is another Trailblazers in multifamily featuring Bill Nye, the apartment guy. Bill Nye has a very distinguished and successful career as a leader in both the military and the private sector. While serving in the United States Air Force, he was named one of the 12 Outstanding Airmen of the Year for the entire Air Force, and was also honored along with his fellow recipients at a dinner at the White House with President Ronald Reagan. He is a graduate of the prestigious Air Force Leadership School and credits much of his leadership philosophies to what he learned while attending. As a multifamily executive, he was named Executive of the Year twice by Apartments Magazine, a multifamily publication covering the Mid-Atlantic region of the U.S. During his time as the CEO of Cavanis and Cates Property Management in North Carolina, his team earned the highest satisfaction ratings in the country 3 consecutive years, and during his time as the COO of Berger Communities in Pennsylvania, they earned the same distinction 2 years in a row. While serving as the COO of Berger Communities, they were named a top 25 best places to work employer for 3 straight years, and a top 10 employer for 2 straight years. Today, Bill runs his own speaking, training, and consulting business in Friendswood, Texas. And now, enjoy Trailblazers in Multifamily Part 1 with Bill Nye.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of Prop Talk, a property management podcast powered by Resman. I'm Elizabeth Francisco. I'm the Chief Experience Officer at Inhabit. And on today's Trailblazer episode, we are joined by the one and only Bill Nye, the apartment guy. I normally have a catchy name for my episodes, but I kind of felt like your name alone is the name of an episode with everything that you bring to the table. So first and foremost, thank you for joining us. This has been a long time coming.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I feel truly honored and blessed because we also had, a little bit of prep time before our podcast today, and we had quite a bit of time together. And, I've known you, almost 10 years, I think?
Yeah, 10 years probably.
You were one of the first early groups to give Resman a chance. And that was one, thank you. But it also gave me some insight into getting close to the company that you were with and kind of getting to see you firsthand and understand your impact on the business. So I've been a fan and impressed for some time. And I know when you started a consulting and speaking engagements, I was really excited about that. So I look forward to us doing more together.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. So I want to get started by just doing a little bit of an introduction and kind of dive into your history. I know that you're also a veteran of the Air Force.
I am, yeah.
So thank you very much for your service. I have a family in the, not the Air Force, but the Army, but I know how you guys are about that.
Yeah. It's a respectful rivalry for sure.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
And I believe, if I remember correctly, reading on your website, that during your time there, or during your service, that you were also selected for a specific leadership program that's offered within the Air Force. So I wanted to start right off the bat because we're going to dive into some good topics about leadership and culture and impacts to the business. But let's lay the foundation about leadership right off the bat, because I know, in your website, you talk about how this really impacted your career post-service and has really led you and helped you be really successful. So talk to me just a little bit about that. Yeah,
that was a life-changing experience. The Air Force alone was a life-changing experience for me because, I grew up on a farm in Ohio, and quite frankly, there were little to no expectations, from our family. And so going to college and that sort of thing just was never a conversation. Interestingly enough, I had an opportunity to go to a small college in Michigan as a basketball player.
Oh.
But it was the academic scholarship would not cover all of the tuition. And so my parents were quick to tell me that there was no money to cover any expenses for anything like that. So, that wasn't going to happen. So in order to pay for college, I enlisted in the Air Force. And little did I know what that was going to do to my life, how it was going to transform me and change me. But the greatest opportunity was when I was selected to attend the leadership school at Yokota Air Base in Japan. And so it's a small school. I don't remember the exact class size. I want to say it was around 25 or 30 individuals. My class happened to be all men. But you get chosen, and you have to go through a real vetting process to be one of those very few who gets a seat in that school. They don't want to waste, that seat on somebody who's, one, not going to be a lifelong member of the Air Force, which, as it turns out, I wasn't, but I didn't know that at the time. And secondly, you demonstrated the ability to lead. And, what's really interesting, I'm going to say something that some people are going to may think is controversial, but not everyone can lead. I think leadership is a talent, just like singing. Not everyone can sing. No one's ever going to pay me to stand on stage and sing. And so I think people can become better leaders, but I think that the talent to be a great leader is innate, just like the talent to be a great singer. Someone who's an average singer can take voice lessons and become a better singer, but they're never going to win a Grammy.
Yeah.
And I think the same way about leadership. I think you can be, a decent leader and with some help become a little better leader, but never going to be a great leader because it's just not in your DNA. You just don't. It just doesn't make sense to you. It's like the world of chefs. Some people just can't cook, and other people are they're magicians in the kitchen. And so you have to demonstrate this ability to be able to lead, and then you get recommendations, and then you go through a process of interviews, and then they tell you, okay, pack your bags, you're going to that school, and you live there. And so school is every day. There's no days off. It doesn't matter if it's Saturday or Sunday, and the days are not 8-hour days. They wake you up. It's like basic training, their boot camp all over again. They wake you up at 5 a.m. and, you start the day with, PT, with your physical training. And then from there you have breakfast and you shower, and then you put on your dress blues, and now you're in the classroom all day. And it has all these different blocks and emphases. But what it did for me more than anything else was it put me in an environment where I was competing against the absolute best. And that's what changed me more than anything else, were those relationships. Sitting in the classroom with guys who were just absolute geniuses. I mean, academically, incredibly gifted, really smart. And I was intimidated, to be honest with you. And I think about some of these guys, and we would study. So you'd be in school for hours and hours and hours, and they may release you, at 8 o'clock at night. And so you've been going since 5 in the morning. That's a long day, right? And so now it's 8 o'clock. What do you do? Well, you've got 2 tests tomorrow. You don't go to bed. You don't relax. You don't watch TV. In fact, I don't think there were any TVs in the school. And so, you get in the study groups. And now here I am. I'm studying with these absolutely just talented, brilliant men who it came natural to them, and it really challenged me, and it pushed me, and so as it turns out, by the time we graduated, they have 5 awards, and so at your graduation, and the graduation's a big deal. You wear the Air Force tuxedo, and so it's a formal event, and there are literally thousands of people come from all around the world to attend this graduation. And so they have 5 award winners, and to be recognized as one of those award winners is just almost unimaginable.
It's huge. Yeah.
And I won 2.
Oh my goodness.
And so between out of my entire class, of the 5 awards went to 3 men. I won 2, another guy won 2, and another guy. And by the way, the other 2 guys were in my study group. So we became like, just really attached to the hip, and we did everything together. We studied together and joked together and inspired and pushed and
challenged each other.
Yeah, absolutely challenged and made fun of each other. And I believe a lot of what happened to me in that school was because of the relationships I forged with my classmates. The instructors were fantastic, and the material and was just top rate, better than anything I'd ever been through in my life. But I'm going to tell you, it was those relationships with my fellow students and just how gifted and talented and special they were that really pushed me to just, not only just complete it and graduate, but to be one of the,
To be one of the best.
Yeah, one of the best in my class. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. As you were sitting there talking, I think this is a great point. Maybe we'll dive into it a little more about multifamily and how to help you grow your own career. I completely agree. I love that I didn't know that part of the story. When I was going to college, I did not know I was going to be a biochemist major, but it started to happen because I ended up in a study group in my very first science class, and it just elevated you. And it was peers and challenge and fun. And there's so much you can learn from that experience and seeking out that experience in your career. Like if it's not offered you, finding it.
Yeah, that's right. I think people underestimate, that impact. And that's one of the things I've tried to do as a leader is, my career has put me in the room with some really impressive people. And, I've tried to then introduce those people to the people that I lead, to give them that same exposure, because I know firsthand the impact it has, when you're putting yourself in a room with the absolute brightest. I don't know if this is going way back, probably dating myself terribly here, but many, many years ago, the Russians shot down a Korean airliner. KAL-007 was the tail number. And so the Air Force has the technology. They track every plane in the air globally. And when that plane was shot down, it was being tracked by a unit in Nevada, and the guy would have to write events like coordinates and things to people on the other side of a glass wall, which meant he had to write backwards.
Oh my!
And now, challenge yourself. Try writing backwards.
Oh yeah.
It's almost impossible to do. Our brains and this guy wrote backwards like you and I write forwards. I mean, it was just, he just started, and because the people on the other side of that glass wall had to read what he was writing. He's the guy who was tracking that plane. He's the guy who reported that the Russians just shot down a commercial airliner. He was that guy.
Oh, wow.
And he was one of my best friends. In fact, he was the guy who won 2 of the other 3 awards.
Oh, wow.
Was that guy. And interestingly enough, we have the same first name. His first name is also Bill. But, my point is, it's so important that you surround yourself by people who challenge you, push you, and make you better. Because, listen, it's easy to find people who drag you down, pull you down, lower your standards. They're everywhere. But it's hard to find people who will actually push you, encourage you, and challenge you to be a better person, to be a better mom, a better dad, a better husband or wife or whatever. Just be a better.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's that, like I said, that's the real key, and finding those people and continuing to surround yourself with people like that. I found it, like I said, it's challenging. I've encountered lots of people that just want to destroy and hurt and lower the standards. It's rare to find somebody who just pushes you and has those incredibly, incredibly high standards for themselves and for everyone else around them.
I wanted to understand, how did you go from, graduating at the top of the class, being in the Air Force, to multifamily? Like,
Yeah, my story's like everybody else's. It was an accident. It was, this is the most common story. It was an accident. It's what everybody says, because it's true. I moved to Durham, North Carolina, going through a really difficult time in my personal life. And so I moved to North Carolina with my children and needed a place to live, single dad. And so I needed the place to live, needed the job. And I've always been really handy. Like I could, I can look at things and figure out how to recreate and how to fix and how to repair. And, the Air Force, I was a flight engineer on a C-141 Starlifter. I learned how to read a schematic on on a jet. And if you can read a schematic on a jet, you can read a schematic on a dishwasher, refrigerator. Quite frankly, it's elementary. And so I for 2 years I worked for York International. They're the second largest manufacturer of heating and air conditioning equipment in the world. I was a tech rep for them. And so I was a heat pump guy. I could repair a heat pump in my sleep.
Okay.
And so I moved to North Carolina, and I need a place to live. I need a job. And somebody said to me, I've heard that if you work in an apartment community, you'll get a discount on your rent. Well, that's gold. That's what I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And so back in those days, you looked for a job in the Sunday paper.
Yeah.
And so got the Durham Herald Sun and went through the paper and found apartment communities that were hiring and typed a resume on an old-fashioned typewriter, put it in an old-fashioned hard-shell American Tourister briefcase, put on a suit and tie, and on Monday morning went to 5 apartment communities that were hiring maintenance supervisors. I knew nothing about apartments. I knew nothing about being a maintenance supervisor, but I knew how to fix stuff and I knew how to lead.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought if they care about those two things and values and just being a good person who will be kind and polite to the customer, the resident in this case, then they'll have an interest in me. And so I went to those 5 apartment communities with my suit and my typed out resumes. None of them were photocopied. Literally typed every resume one at a time because that's how you did it in the early 1990s. And so by Wednesday, I had 5 job offers. All 5 offered me a position. One of them offered me $9 an hour. Yeah, that's life-changing money, and a free apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the job I took. That was at South Point Apartments in Durham, North Carolina. 188 units. I don't remember now the exact unit count, but that was on a Wednesday, and I started on Thursday.
Wow.
And held that position for a year, was their maintenance supervisor. And on my 1-year anniversary, I found out that our property manager, who was had just had a baby, and she had cerebral palsy, so the pregnancy was really hard on her. Mm-hmm. Kathy Howard, just a great person, and I'll never forget Kathy and what she did to help me understand the business. Mm-hmm. And so Kathy and her husband Marty decided she was not going to come back to work. She was going to be a stay-at-home mom. And so the owner of the property took me to lunch and asked me if I wanted to be the property manager. And
talk about the sink or swim
right.
job offer.
Right, not the assistant manager, the maintenance guy. Hey, you want to? Mm-hmm. And so the most important question I had in that moment was, what about my free apartment?
Forget all the different work.
Right. That's what mattered. I got these kids, and I got to make sure we have a roof over our head. And she laughed at me, and she said, Bill, as long as you work for me, you'll always have a free apartment. I'll never forget her saying that to me. And so I think she gave me about $1.50 an hour raise. Gave me a salary, $22,000 a year. So that's about $10.50 an hour, right? And so, I got a raise and got to keep my free apartment. And that was on a Friday. And on Monday, I went to work as the new property manager and put that necktie back on that I wore when I first interviewed.
Yeah.
And
what a great
struggle.
Story.
Yeah.
What a blessing, though, because you did start in maintenance.
Yeah.
My experience in multifamily, being an operator, I credit to that individual. His name was Charles Hawks, and what I learned about maintenance, because it was fundamental in learning and being successful and often exceeding expectations. So what a blessing that's the way that you came in, and then to be able to take that up. I'm quite certain as you rose through the ranks that maintenance teams were very thankful that you were there.
I tried hard to always remember, who I am, mm-hmm. and, my title. One of the things, Elizabeth, I've always led with this. I have a lot of philosophies. The people who've worked for me for years, they always joke about these Billisms. That's a Billism. People, use these terms that I use all the time. And one of the Billisms that I've used over the years is my title and position doesn't make me right. Mm-hmm. And so, I think it's important for leaders to always maintain a sense of humility. Just because I'm the CEO, the president, mm-hmm. the COO, that doesn't make me right. And so I never, I worked hard to make sure I always remembered who I am. Mm-hmm. People say I try to remember where I came from. I think it's a little more impactful to say remember who you are.
Yeah.
And so I always try to remember who I am. And I'm just a guy who fixes things. Who, Everett Rogers wrote a theory in 1962 called the diffusion and innovation. And so when you talk about, I was one of the early adapters. Everett Rogers came up with this theory that in life, everybody fits into this mm-hmm. chart, this graph, and so 2.5%, according to his research, 2.5% of our society are early adapters. Mm-hmm. They adapt to things. They see the value in stuff right away. They want to be the first ones to do it. and then the early majority comes behind them, and then you have the majority that comes behind them, and then you have the slow majority comes behind them, and then the last 2.5%, which you start with 2.5%, and in his theory you finish with 2.5%. Those are the laggards.
Yeah.
Those are the people who still have a phone on the wall at home, have a landline,
have a fax machine.
Yeah, have a fax machine and have a flip phone in their pocket, and they don't understand this texting thing.
Yeah.
And so, I think being an early adapter, being in that 2.5%, because that's a small percentage, right? Mm-hmm. Being in that 2.5% has really served me well. It's allowed me to do things that others needed to prove out or wait and see. Mm-hmm. And so I think that allowed me to go from being a maintenance supervisor to a property manager to a regional manager to a president, a CEO, and a COO.
Yeah. Do you find too that that mentality of being in that 2%, those early adapters, also it comes down to a certain mindset about your own abilities?
Yeah.
Because there's inherent risk with that. But I think there's some of us, and I think I'm probably in that same boat with you, that like failure is not an option.
Right.
There may be something I don't understand. I always say this inside Resman. It's not about what I can't do. It's just about what I haven't done yet.
Right.
So I may not know the answer. There is always an answer. So there's always a way to still do it. If you have that mindset, maybe you're more comfortable taking a little more risk, because then you put some of that recovery on yourself,
right,
if needed.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Listen, that's one of the questions I ask people oftentimes in meetings is, what's your stomach for risk? Mm-hmm. Because I think when you're asking people to do things they're uncomfortable with, that's common. But where at what point do they become uncomfortable? Some people become uncomfortable in the first step. Other people, think about climbing up, a mountain. Some people become uncomfortable 10 feet up above the parking lot, mm-hmm, where other people don't become uncomfortable until they're 10,000 feet above the parking lot. And that's why I asked that question, what's your stomach for risk? Because I don't ever want to take you to the point where you become paralyzed. But mm-hmm, I want to push you beyond where you think you can go until you get, and we've all seen these stories of people get to the point where they're so far beyond their comfort level that they sit down and you can't get them to move. Mm-hmm. Well, what good did that do? Now other people have got to stop doing what they're doing to care for that person, to pick that person up and carry them back down the mountain.
Yeah.
I don't have time to carry you back down the mountain. So let's know where that line is. Yeah. And let's push you to that line. And it's probably farther up the mountain than you thought, but let's be aware of where it is, because part of being a great leader is showing people that you care about them. Not that you just want to push them, because that's one of the things I love about, my time in the military is I served under commanders who all they did was push. They used their title and their position to push because mm-hmm, they could. That's the hierarchy of the military, right? I outrank you, you do what I say, and there's no debate, there's no conversation. And so, I served under a lot of men who led just by pushing. But the best didn't just push, but they cared. Mm-hmm. And, that really stood out to me when I served under a commander that cared about, his men and women. Mm-hmm. I saw the impact that had on all of us. Mm-hmm. And you're willing to do more when you believe in your leader than you're afraid of your leader.
Yeah. When you know that your leader believes in you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that comment that you made about my title doesn't make me right.
Yeah.
And I could not agree more. And I think, sometimes with the pressure and the heads down, you can lose sight of that. Mm-hmm. I know my own personal experiences. I've dealt with some of that in my past. I've tried to be careful to not be that person. I think probably with Resman, it wasn't as much of an issue because I was learning while doing and recognized that. Sometimes to a fault, because I kind of second guessed myself along the way, because I figured you hire all these people in that have been from prop tech. They know what they're doing.
Right.
You hire smart people because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't tell you how it's going to make you feel if you're not at the same level they are.
Right.
But then I always wanted to be at that level. So, continue to challenge yourself. But I've watched people in different roles that do rely on the title. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, one of them was from the military. And I think one of the struggles was in seeing the leadership. It's funny you said that. That was the one thing that was the challenge, I think, that held that team back and that leader struggled with, is his people did not believe he was invested in them and their success. But I've seen that numerous times, in my career in multifamily. Luckily, I've been with companies where people like that don't last, right? Because if you want to exceed expectations, people have to be bought in.
Yeah.
They have to be engaged. They have to feel empowered. They got to be excited and passionate about what they do. And I know that you have a certain comment or ideology around the word passion, which might be my way of transitioning. I want to say the comment that you made to me was commitment is a byproduct of passion.
That's right.
Right. Okay.
Right.
All right. Well, let's start there. Tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah. So people become committed to things because they're passionate about it. And when you kill the passion, the commitment leaves. Nobody is committed to anything they're not passionate about. I don't care if it's a hobby. People love to knit. They're passionate about knitting. So because they're passionate about it, they're committed to it. They do it all the time, right? I love to work with my hands. I just completely tore apart our fireplace in our home and rebuilt the fireplace out of stone. And it's gorgeous. In fact, I'll show you a picture later. But I'm super proud of it. Well, I'm passionate about that stuff. So I spend a lot of time doing those types of things. So commitment is a byproduct of passion. And so the key in leadership is understanding what makes people passionate. See, what we do is we focus on the commitment. That's the wrong thing. We got to focus on the passion. When you tap into the passion, you get the commitment. But when leaders try to get people to commit without any passion, it's artificial. It's fake. There's nothing real about it. And so it's understanding what people are passionate about. And so, one of the things I tell people when I talk about leadership, and I get invited to speak about leadership all over the country, and one of the things I say is, stop trying to motivate people. That is not your job. That is not the job of a leader. In fact, I don't think a leader can actually motivate anyone. I think people are either motivated or they're not.
Okay.
And so it's not your job to motivate them. It's your job to inspire them. If you can understand how to inspire people and ignite that passion, then you will get their commitment. But without that, you won't get their commitment. The only thing they're committed to is the paycheck or something that's very tangible and transactional, rather than that true really pouring your heart and soul into something to make things better. Because you have to understand that the people who come to work for a paycheck, they're good people. We've all taken a job for a paycheck, right?
That's fair.
Right. And, and Maslow calls it a hierarchy of needs: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is the person who does what they do for food, water, and shelter. And that doesn't make them bad. They don't steal, they don't lie, but they're never going to solve your problems. They're never going to come to work and say, I have an idea. They do it simply for the money, because the money is what they then trade for food, water, and shelter. They're an id. And so the goal is to have in your key positions in your organization, what Maslow calls, the egos. Those are the people who do what they do for recognition and appreciation. Well, how do you get recognized? How do you earn appreciation? By doing more than is expected, right?
Right. They're not the clock watchers.
That's right. You're committed to it. And why are you committed? Because you're passionate about it. Well, what inspires them? The recognition and appreciation. See, it's really not science. When you break it down, that's simple. But now recognition and appreciation comes in different forms. That's where it becomes a little bit more of a nuance, is understanding, how does this person, how often and how and when do they need to be recognized and appreciated? And it has to be genuine, come from the leader. And of course, then, the highest level is the superego. Those are the people who are your absolute stars. You can't live without them. They're the people who have self-actualized. And somebody asked me one time, what does that mean to self-actualize at work? And I define it in a very simple way. It's when you can no longer tell the difference between work and play. See, now you say that to an id, and an id says, what? What are you talking about? I never confuse work and play.
Yeah.
But you say that to a superego, and they're like, yeah, no, I get it. What I do, I love. This is my thing. This is my jam.
This is my life.
Right. This isn't work to me, because when I'm on stage, speaking, I'm not working. Listen, it's exhausting. You go to a trade show and they want you to speak 3 times, by the third session, your feet and ankles hurt from standing on a hard surface, and you've expelled all this energy, and all I want to do is just crawl into bed and sleep for 3 days. It's exhausting, but it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because I'm passionate about it. And because I'm passionate about it, I'm committed to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's about understanding what inspires people. How do you inspire people?
Yeah.
And if you can light that fuse of inspiration instead of motivation, because they're two very different things.
And that's what I was going to ask. So if we went back to that comment,
yeah,
because I know you've worked with a lot of companies and done some consulting. When you say it's not your job to motivate, which I understand, I'm completely following you here and agree with what you're saying. What would be examples, or if I'm in an organization and we're thinking along lines of motivating, what might that look like? Like, how do you help someone recognize that they're focused more on motivation than they are about inspiring and empowering?
Yeah. To me, I'll tell you what it looks like. It looks like pushing.
Okay.
If you're always pushing, people call that motivating. That's the word because let's be honest, it sounds better to say, I love trying to motivate my team. What you're really saying is, I have to push my team, because if I don't push my team's not going to move. They're not going to get done what we have to get done. Growing up on a farm, I learned how that looks, because, we had a huge hay field, and our hay was important. Because that's how we fed our livestock during the winter months.
Right.
Couldn't let them, this is in Ohio. We get snow. Everything is covered by snow. You can't just open the barn and turn the cows and the pigs loose and let them go graze, because there's nothing to eat. So you've got to have hay in the barn for your livestock. That's right, to survive through the winter. And so I can remember as a kid, my dad, would say at the dinner table, we've got to get X number of bales in the barn tomorrow, because the next day it's going to rain. Mm-hmm. And so, he pushed. Now, my dad listen, that rain meant nothing to me, but that was my dad's motivation. Mm-hmm. But see, my dad's motivation became my dad's rod. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And so that's what happens, is that leaders have this incentive, and they use their motivation, their incentive, to try and motivate other people.
Yep.
And it becomes a push. My dad would push us. We got to get this hay in the barn, okay? Because if it gets rained on, it could be ruined. And I remember, learning these valuable lessons of what that does to hay, how it sets in the barn and then it begins to mold and then the cows won't eat it. Mm-hmm. And so you got to get it in. But I didn't care about that. I'm 12 years old. It's not what I wanted to do. So I had to be pushed.
Yeah.
But so I understand my dad had motivation. I didn't have any motivation. Mm-hmm. My motivation was to get done and go hit the baseball field in town, because my little league team has a game tonight. And if we get this finished in time, then I go. So if my dad said to me, look, we got to get this in by 3:00 or by 4:00, because that'll give you time to jump on your bike and ride 8 miles into town on your bike, and play baseball tonight. See, that did it for me. Mm-hmm. But my dad simply saying to me, this has to get done because it's going to rain. I don't care. I don't care. Right?
Yeah,
see?
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean by everybody has their own. They have to be motivated. They have to have their own why.
Yes.
That's your motivation, is your personal why.
Right.
And so, I understand my dad's personal why now that I'm looking back years later. But I didn't understand it then. My personal why was very different from my dad's, but because my dad didn't tap into it, it didn't inspire me to work faster. I did it out of fear. There was this fear of my dad would be angry, and he'd be disappointed, and all of that. And that's what happens when leaders try to motivate, is they end up creating an environment that's filled with fear.
Yep.
And disappointment.
Yep. And sadly, fear does work initially.
It does.
But the longer you utilize and rely on fear, the more people become desensitized to it. And then it doesn't work. So that whatever lift you got initially, it doesn't last. I think coming out of the pandemic, or during the pandemic and then post-pandemic, if you look around the industry, lots of hot topics, right? Every conference, every webinar was I mean, you could pick 15 different things a day, it seemed like. And then at the conferences about, DEI engagement, employee engagement, importance of culture. So much so that if you were an outsider looking in, you might think at this point we've kind of figured it out, and that
Right.
our historically low churn rate, right, or historically high, churn rate, which I think was 70% at one point during the post-pandemic. But even before that, multifamily as a whole, our churn rate is higher than almost every other industry.
That's right.
So if I'm looking out from the outside in, looking at all this, I'm like, well, look, they figured it out. Something tells me that's not the case. And I'm curious from your experiences, out speaking and consulting, what is the reality of where culture's prioritized and how it's viewed today versus maybe the perception? Because my gut tells me, and from what I've seen, I'll just say, it seems like the two may not be as closely aligned as we think.
Yeah, they're not.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. I think we have two issues here. Okay. Issue one is there's a great misunderstanding as to what culture actually is. Mm-hmm. And the second is we're listening to the wrong people. Okay. And I think we tend to do that. Mm-hmm. Something becomes sellable. All of a sudden I'm an expert on that topic because I can make money off of it. Mm-hmm. But 6 months ago, you were claiming to be an expert on something entirely different. Mm-hmm. And now you're traveling around the country doing DE&I seminars all over the country. And, a year ago, you didn't even know what that meant. That's weird to me. That's really weird. Leadership is like piloting a plane. It's complex. And you're not going to go back to a passenger and say, have you ever seen the cockpit of a plane? I have. We need a pilot. Jump in the seat. But we do that. I use the example of, you've got a son or a daughter and you're a mom, you don't let your 10-year-old drive. People say, well, it's because it's illegal. Well, why is it illegal? Because
they can't do it.
That's right. Because that's right. Because they're incapable of making good decisions, navigating down today's highway. And so, your son or daughter's been sitting in the car with you for 16 years. Are they ready to be handed the keys to a car and just start driving on their own? Because they've been in the car for 16 years. Therefore, they could make the argument, I know what I'm doing. I've seen you do it for 16 years. I'm ready. But we'd say, well, that's ridiculous. You've got to go through a process. Mm-hmm. And
even after that, your insurance may still tell the wrong story.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So
shout out.
And then we turn around and we say, well, I think we've got to make more of an emphasis on, and then somebody says, well, I can help you with that. Spend a little time to dig into what their background is. Mm-hmm. Are they simply, chasing the paycheck, or are they truly qualified to help you with that? But, like I say, I think we've got to, here's why I believe that we've got a complete misunderstanding of what culture is. Mm-hmm. Because I hear people say all the time, build a culture, build a culture, build a culture. Nobody builds a culture. You don't build a culture. Right. That is completely the wrong approach. It's the wrong mentality. Do you build love? When we talk about love between two people, do we refer to it as their love is really building? No, we don't. That's weird, right? Have you ever heard somebody say, no. Boy, our love is really building? Love is what? Growing. Yeah. That's right. We say it's growing. Yeah. You don't build a culture. You grow a culture. Mm. You see, if you understand growing versus building, they're completely different skill sets.
Yes.
And so if somebody's listening to this, they say, oh, he's just being technical. No, I'm not. And I'll explain to you why. If you wanted to build a shed in your backyard, you went to Lowe's, Home Depot, wherever, and you bought all the material. You bought the lumber, you bought bags of concrete, you bought all the hardware, the nails, the screws, you bought the tools, you bought the shingles, everything to build a shed. And the supplier delivers it into your backyard. They put it out there. There it is. Everything to have a fully functioning shed. Mm-hmm. But you never touch it.
It's not going to build itself.
That's right. Every day you look out your window and say, come on, shed, you can do it. Come on.
The shed's not properly motivated.
See, that's right. A shed requires you to actually be actively involved to build it. Mm-hmm. But when you grow something, it actually will do a lot. Things will grow without you ever touching it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a big gardener. I love to get growing up on a farm. You know, I've got living in Texas. We have 4 growing seasons.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in growing season number 2 right now, and I'm growing specific things that grow this time of year where I live, and I'm in zone 9. And so I will tell you, I was in my garden last night, and guess what I saw growing? Things that I didn't want to grow.
Oh,
because
okay.
that's what happens. So
weeds?
That's right, weeds. And so what did I do?
Pulled out the weeds.
That's right. I started pulling out the weeds. I got
great
my
stress relief too, by the way.
Yeah, I got my hoe and I got my trowel and I got on my hands and knees and I started pulling out the weeds. Knowing that I was going to be out of town for 3 days, I made sure that I watered last night. You see, growing requires work to get what you want, but it requires no work to get something.
Mm-hmm.
That's culture.
Okay.
So in other words, you go out in your backyard. Now you got the shed. Until you touch it, it's never going to happen, right?
Right.
You go out in your backyard and you take a shovel and you dig up the grass and you work up the dirt and you get it nice and loose, and then you go in the house and you never touch it. And you go out to that same spot a year later. Is it a bare spot?
No.
That's right. It's not. What happened?
Yep. Weeds and other things filled it in.
That's culture. Culture will grow whether you work on it or not.
Amen.
Every organization has a culture. When I ask people what makes your organization unique, our culture, everybody has a culture. See, Elizabeth, the minute 2 people come together and partner on anything, whether it's a personal relationship, a business relationship, a nonprofit, a church, a organization of faith, whatever it is, and the minute 2 people come together, guess what starts to grow in that moment? Culture. Culture starts to grow. The
relationship.
That's right, the relationship. And that's what culture is. See, culture grows whether you work it or not. So when I see this all the time, I see in conferences, I look at, the speakers and what they're talking about, and I see people like building a culture of blank. I'm like, you don't build a culture. You grow a culture, a different skill set, completely different skill set. Just because you can build something doesn't mean you can grow something.
Yep.
And because I'm going to tell you, growing
takes a continual investment.
It does. That's
Amen.
exactly right.
Yep.
If I want to build, when I built that stone fireplace in our house this weekend, when I laid that last stone in place all the way up at the ceiling, standing on that big tall ladder, at that point, guess what? It's done. I'm finished. There's nothing more for me to do other than just sit on the couch and just listen to my wife say, it's just magnificent. She just loves it, and it just makes me so happy. But that's what I mean. If you think you build a culture, then you think at some point you stop focusing on it.
Yep.
But if you understand that you grow a culture, just like love grows, what happens to love when you stop cultivating and working the relationship? That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. Bad things start to happen. When you stop working your field, bad things start to grow. Infidelity, dishonesty, lack of trust, lack of empowerment, lack of engagement. All of those things will grow in your culture if you don't pull them. They are weeds. Mm-hmm. And so when people say, this is how you build a culture, you don't build a culture.
And let me ask, do you find that you have come across companies where there was a period of focusing on growth and there's a lot of work put into, getting feedback? What's our message? What's our vision? But at some point, it became a set it and forget it.
Yep.
Yeah. What do you think leads to that? Because I see it too. And what do you think leads to that?
Yeah, that's actually a really easy question to answer. So, think about your children. Okay, how many children do you have?
I have 2.
Okay, how old are they?
31 and 27.
Okay, all right. They're a little bit behind mine. My youngest is 31. My oldest is 40. And so, when your children were 15, where did they live?
With me.
Why? What's wrong with them? They're 15 years old. Why didn't they have their own place, paying their own bills, living on their own, being self-sufficient? Because we know that 15, they're not ready.
Yes.
Correct?
Correct.
That's why. That's the answer right there. Meaning that human development takes forever. It is a long, slow process. Most people who have a C title actually have one thing in common. They lack patience. because there's a lot of expectations. There's a lot of demands. If they're
I can
publicly,
agree with that.
if they're publicly traded, you got shareholders, you've got a board of directors. And so you got you got investors, and they want results, and they want results now. And so they want it to happen now. And so to grow a healthy culture that produces results over and over and over takes time. Just like raising your children, it takes time. It's a lifelong investment. Farming never stops. As a kid growing up, I watched all of I'd go back to school in the fall, and all my friends, first, a teacher, so what did y'all do over the summer? We went to Niagara Falls. We went to Orlando. And then it came my turn. It's like, well, we milked the cows. We fed the hogs. We gathered eggs. We didn't go anywhere because we couldn't.
Yeah.
We were farmers.
Yeah.
You couldn't go anywhere. You had crops to work and get in the barn and take the market. And so, farming is just, you work 7 days a week. Even, we went to church on Sunday. When we came home from church, we had our Sunday dinner, and then you put on your overalls and you got back out in the barn or back out in the field and you worked. And so it takes time. It's human development is a long, slow process that comes with no guarantees.
Yeah. Because
you're a great mom, you love your kids, you do the best you can, and then one of them is just a knucklehead. I mean, just keeps you awake at night. It always needs, financial help, always needs, right? We all know people like that. They've got a kid in their family that they're 30 years old and just bleeding mom and dad dry, can't keep a job, can't keep a healthy relationship. They have no guidance or direction in life. So that's my point, is that there's no guarantee that this development is actually going to produce the results that you want over and over and over. But I will tell you, it's way more sustainable than fear and driving and relying on policies and procedures. But if I've got an issue in my company and I think I can make things better by creating the new policy, I can write a policy in 30 minutes. But I can't develop anyone in 30 minutes.
Right.
But I want everybody who's listening to this to listen to me on purpose. This is probably the most...
Listen to me on purpose.
Yeah, that's a Billism people say. This is probably the most impactful thing I can say. No great meal ever came out of a microwave.
Amen. I totally agree. I hate microwaves to this day.
A great meal requires prep.
Yep.
And the right ingredients and picking out the right ingredients. And I mean, it just takes time, right?
Yep.
My wife and I love these cooking shows, Master Chef and Top Chef. Yeah. We love these shows. And, it takes time to serve a gourmet meal. And so for the leaders out there, look, if you want it right, it takes time. It will not come out of a microwave. There is no policy that's going to guarantee sustainable success. No policy.
Stay tuned for part 2 of Trailblazers in Multifamily featuring Bill Nye, the apartment guy.